The pen was heavy. Not actually heavy. It was a ballpoint pen, the kind you find in any conference room in any office building in the country. But when you're about to sign your name to a document that transfers ownership of a professional football club for $140 million, everything feels heavier than it should. The room was full of lawyers, financial advisors, the outgoing ownership group, and 3 cameras from a local sports network that had somehow gotten access to the signing. I was in a charcoal suit that my assistant had picked out because she said I needed to look like someone who buys football clubs and not like someone who grew up sharing a bedroom with 2 brothers in a 3-room house on the Blackfoot Reservation in Montana. I signed. And then the room erupted. Handshakes, congratulations, the particular corporate excitement of people who have completed a very large transaction. And one of the cameras swept across the room the way cameras do, capturing faces and reactions. And on the large monitor at the front of the conference room, where the sports network was streaming a preview clip, a face appeared. Not mine. His. Brandon Hawk, number 7, starting wide receiver for the Copper Ridge Stallions. Which was, as of approximately 40 seconds ago, my football club. My ex-girlfriend's husband. I looked at that face on the screen for exactly 2 seconds. And then I smiled. Not a performance smile. A real one, the kind that starts somewhere in your chest and travels up. Let me tell you how we got here. Welcome back to Calm Family Stories. And if you're new here, welcome home. This is the place where we tell the stories that remind you that the people who counted you out were always counting wrong. I am so glad you're here for this one, because Jeff's story is something else. It has everything: the love that felt like home, the betrayal that felt like the ground disappearing, the years of building in the dark, and a moment of arrival so perfectly structured that if I'd written it as fiction, an editor would have told me it was too convenient. It's not fiction. This is the kind of thing that actually happens to people who do the work and refuse to let the worst chapters define the whole story. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now, before the story starts. Because once we get going, I promise you, you will not want to stop for anything, including remembering to subscribe. Hit that button. And let's go get into Jeff's story. My name is Jeff Runningwater, and I grew up on the Blackfoot Reservation in the wide, sky-heavy country of northwestern Montana, where the mountains come out of the earth like something that decided to keep going, and the winters are long enough to make you a philosopher whether you want to be one or not. We were not wealthy. I want to be precise about that rather than romantic. Not poor in the way that gets written about with a kind of distant pity, but working class in the specific, practical way of families who know the value of things because they have calculated the value of everything carefully since before you were born. My father, Raymond Runningwater, was a carpenter. He built things with his hands: furniture, repairs, cabinets, sometimes whole rooms, with the patience and precision of a man who understood that quality was the only advertisement that lasted. My mother, Dorothy, worked at the tribal health center, first as an administrative assistant and then, after she got her certification, as a counselor. They were good people. I want to say that clearly because this story is not about difficult parents. It is about other kinds of difficulty. My parents were good and they loved us and they made sure we knew, every day, in practical ways, that we mattered. Us was me and my 2 brothers. Calvin, 4 years older, who had our father's hands and our mother's patience and who became an electrician at 21 and has been one ever since with a contentment that I have spent years recognizing as a form of wisdom. And Marcus, 2 years younger, who was the funniest person in any room before he was 8 years old and has never lost the title. We grew up in the specific freedom of wide country. Space, land, sky, the reservation's particular geography of community. Everyone knowing everyone, which was sometimes claustrophobic and sometimes the most comforting thing in the world. We played outside until dark every evening. We knew the names of birds and the behavior of weather. We understood, without being taught it formally, that belonging to a place is not the same as being limited by it. I was the one who read everything. Every book in the school library, which was not a large library, and then every book I could get through the county system, and then anything I could find online when the internet finally arrived with enough reliability to be useful. I read without agenda. Fiction, history, biography, anything. I was a hungry reader the way some kids are hungry athletes, with that specific, slightly unfocused hunger that doesn't know yet what it's reaching for but reaches anyway. I was also, from the age of 14, entrepreneurial in a way that nobody quite knew what to do with. It started with lawn mowing. Not the casual neighborhood entrepreneurship of a kid with a mower. I mean actual systematized lawn care, with regular clients and a schedule and a pricing structure that I had worked out based on the size of yard and the frequency of service. By the time I was 15, I had 11 regular clients and enough money to buy my own equipment. By 16, I had hired my first employee, a kid from school named Tommy Eagleheart, who needed money and was reliable, and I was doing more volume than I could handle alone. My father watched this with the quiet satisfaction of someone recognizing something familiar in a new form. He didn't say much about it. He said make sure you're keeping records and the quality has to stay consistent, and once, just once, coming home from a job site when I was loading equipment into the truck. You see how things work, Jeff. That's a gift. Be careful with it. My mother said, don't let the money make you someone you're not. The lawn care business ran through high school. By the time I graduated, it was providing enough income that college felt possible in a way it hadn't when I was 14, and the calculation was purely about scholarship availability and loan capacity. I had money saved. Not enough for everything, but enough for the conversation to be different. I went to the State University business program. I arrived with a specific hunger of someone who has been preparing without fully knowing what they were preparing for. And the university turned out to be the place where the preparation met the direction. And the place where I met Cassandra. She was in my economics class, first semester, junior year. I'd transferred in after 2 years at a community college, which meant I arrived with credits but without the social infrastructure that comes from spending your first 2 years in a place. I was slightly outside the established groups, which was fine, which suited my particular kind of independence. She sat 2 rows ahead of me and 1 seat to the left, which meant that for 3 months I watched the back of her head during lectures before I spoke to her directly. She had long black hair and the specific quality of attention that serious students have. Not performing attention, just genuinely and completely present to whatever was being said. She turned around once, during a group exercise, and said, "Are you in a group?" I said I wasn't. "Come with us," she said. I came. Her name was Cassandra Littlefeather, and she was from the Crow Nation in south-central Montana. She was studying finance and she was, academically, one of the strongest students in our program. Sharp, precise, with a kind of analytical intelligence that made things clear rather than more complicated. She was also warm in a way that didn't advertise itself. The warmth you find in people who are genuinely interested in other people rather than performing interest. We became study partners. Then friends. Then something that wasn't quite friends anymore. Though neither of us announced the transition. It just arrived, the way certain things arrive when 2 people have spent enough time being honest with each other that the honest thing becomes the feeling. I told her about the reservation, about my parents, about Calvin and Marcus and the lawn care business and the books. She told me about her family, her mother who wove traditional Crow textiles and sold them, her father who worked in natural resources management for the tribe, her grandmother who spoke Crow as her primary language and who Cassandra called every Sunday, a detail that made something warm move through me because it reminded me of the way I called my own mother. We were together by February. Officially together, with the clarity that comes when you stop pretending the ambiguity serves anyone. For 2.5 years, Cassandra was the best part of my life. I want to be honest about that. Not nostalgic, not bitter, but honest. She was brilliant and she challenged me in the right ways. She pushed back on my ideas, she asked hard questions about my business plans, she told me when I was wrong in the direct, non-cruel way of someone who respects you enough to say it clearly. She was fully present with me in a way that I had not experienced before. I trusted her with everything, with the specific insecurities that come from building something when everyone around you is starting from a more established position, with the fear that the gap between where I was and where I was going was too large to close. She knew my whole story. I gave it to her. And I believed, completely and without reservation, that she was giving me hers. That was the mistake I didn't know I was making. I need to tell you about Brandon Hawk before I tell you about what happened, because understanding him is part of understanding everything. Brandon Hawk was the university's starting wide receiver. All-conference 2 years running. The kind of athlete who existed in a different social register than most students. Visible in the way that star athletes at mid-size universities are visible, meaning everywhere, meaning on the sports section of the student newspaper and the promotional materials for the athletic program and the conversations of everyone who paid attention to football, which at this university was most people. He was Cheyenne, from the northern Cheyenne Nation in southeastern Montana. And he was, by any objective measure, exceptionally good-looking. The combination of athletic visibility and physical presence that produces a specific kind of social gravity. Rooms oriented toward him the way compass needles orient toward north. Not because he demanded it, he was smooth enough not to demand anything so crudely, but because that was simply what happened when he was present. I knew who he was the way you know who the prominent people on a campus are, peripherally, without personal investment, the way you know the weather without tracking it every day. I didn't know that Cassandra knew him. I found out in the worst possible way, which is the way these things tend to be found out. Not as a direct confession, not as a careful conversation, but as a thing you stumble into when you weren't looking for it and cannot unsee once you've seen it. It was a Thursday afternoon in April of my senior year. I had been in the library for 3 hours working on a business plan. Not for class, for real. My lawn care business had evolved over the college years into something larger, something with actual business architecture, and I was building a formal plan for a services company that I intended to launch the summer after graduation. I came out of the library at 4:30 into a campus afternoon that was starting to be warm, the first real warmth of a Montana spring. I was on my phone, looking at a text from Marcus, not fully watching where I was going, when I almost walked into someone. I looked up and apologized. And then I saw that it was Cassandra. And the person beside her, whose arm she was touching in the specific, proprietary way of someone who is completely comfortable with the closeness, was Brandon Hawk. She saw me at the same moment I saw her. The look on her face lasted half a second. Surprise, then something else, something I could not immediately name but that my body registered before my brain did. Something that was not guilt exactly, or not only guilt. Something more complicated. Something that contained guilt but also a kind of decision, a kind of well, now it's happening. "Jeff," she said. "Hey," I said. Brandon Hawk looked between us with the comfortable social ease of a man who has been in uncomfortable situations often enough to know how to manage them superficially. "How's it going?" he said, in the tone of someone who is acknowledging a presence without investing in it. "Good," I said. 3 seconds of the most information-dense silence I have ever occupied. And then Cassandra said, and this is the sentence I have turned over more times than I can count. She said, "I was going to talk to you about this." Not, "This is nothing." Not, "It's not what it looks like." She said I was going to talk to you about this. Past continuous. I was going to. She was going to. Which meant there was a this to talk about. Which meant she'd been deciding when to have the conversation. Which meant it had been happening long enough that a conversation about it had been planned and postponed and planned again. I looked at her for one more moment. Then I said very calmly, "Okay. Whenever you're ready." And I walked away. I walked all the way to the far side of campus. I sat on a bench overlooking the practice fields. I stayed there for an hour and I let myself feel the full weight of what I had just understood, which was this. The person I had trusted with everything had been carrying a different story than the one we were supposed to be writing together. She came to my apartment that evening. I had known she would. Cassandra was not someone who let things remain unaddressed. That was one of the things I had loved about her. She sat down across from me at my kitchen table, the same kitchen table where we had studied together, eaten together, built things together, and she looked at me with the face of someone who has been rehearsing something and is now discovering that the rehearsed version is inadequate. "How long?" I said. She folded her hands. 3 months. 3 months. "Were you going to tell me?" "Yes," she said. "I was trying to figure out how." "How long does it take to figure out how?" She was quiet for a moment. "Jeff." "Cassandra." I was steady. I had made myself steady during that hour on the bench. I was not going to perform devastation in front of someone who had chosen this. "I want to understand something. You and I have talked. In the 2.5 years we've been together, we have talked about everything. You told me once that honesty was the thing you valued most in a relationship. You said it specifically. You remember." "I remember." "So help me understand. Not why you developed feelings for someone else. That's human, I get that. Help me understand why honesty was a value that applied to everything except this." She looked at the table for a moment. "Because I was afraid," she said. "Of what?" "Of losing you. And then once it had gone on longer than it should have, of losing what we were, of what you'd think, of what everyone would think. So you chose to keep lying to protect a version of something that wasn't real anymore. She didn't answer. Because the answer was yes, and she knew it, and saying yes out loud was a different thing from simply having it be true. He's different from you, she said eventually. And I want you to understand. She meant this as an explanation, not an insult. I think she believed she was giving me useful information. In what ways? I said. She looked at me carefully. Jeff, you're so focused. On the business, on the plan, on the next thing. It's one of the things I love about you. But sometimes it felt like I was part of the plan. Like I was accounted for. And Brandon is just. He's present in a different way. It's not that he's more, it's just different, I said. Yes. I nodded slowly. I understood what she was saying. She was saying that my ambition had created distance, that my focus had made her feel secondary, that Brandon Hawk's particular quality of presence was something my particular quality of forward motion didn't provide. These were things worth saying. These were things I needed to hear, eventually, with enough distance to hear them correctly. In that moment, they felt like someone using a fact to paper over a betrayal. I'm going to ask you to leave, I said. She stood up. She picked up her bag. At the door she stopped, and she said, I'm sorry, Jeff. I genuinely am. You deserved better than how I handled this. Yes, I said. I did. She left. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I got out my notebook, the one where I was building the business plan, and I worked until 3 in the morning. Not to escape the pain. The pain was there and it was going to be there for a while, and I knew that. I worked because the thing I could control, the thing that was mine regardless of what anyone else did or didn't do, was the work. That night became the night I decided something important. Not consciously, not in a speech I made to myself. But in the choosing to work, in the turning toward the thing that was real and solid and genuinely mine, something in me made a decision that I would build something that no one could take from me. Something that lived in the world because I had put it there. Something that didn't depend on anyone else's continued presence or loyalty or honesty. I didn't know then what the shape of it would be. I just knew the direction. Graduation was 6 weeks after that Thursday afternoon. I had genuinely thought, that the ending of the relationship was the worst of it. That the conversation at the kitchen table was the full accounting. That what remained was the quiet grief of something real concluding and then the forward motion of building the life I'd been planning. I underestimated Cassandra Littlefeather. Not her deliberately, specifically. I don't think she orchestrated what came next. But there is a way that choices have social consequences that ripple outward from the original decision, and sometimes those ripples arrive at your shore with more force than anyone intended. The graduation ceremony was a shared one. The full business program, several hundred students, families in the audience, the pomp and the occasion that these things carry. It was a good day. My parents drove up from the reservation, my father in his good shirt, my mother with the quiet dignity she brought to everything important. Marcus came too, because Marcus would not have missed it, and he spent the whole ceremony making faces at me from the audience every time I looked in his direction. The reception afterward was where it happened. I was talking to my father when I heard it. A voice. I won't name her because she was essentially an incidental character in her own cruelty, a friend of Cassandra's named Sierra who had always found me mildly amusing in the way people sometimes find the focused, working-class kid from the reservation amusing. Sierra's voice, carrying clearly from the group 3 feet away. I heard Brandon gave Cassie a ring. And another voice. Already. Apparently he asked her the week after graduation. She said yes. They're announcing it this weekend. And then Sierra's voice again, and this is the part that landed. Honestly, I feel bad for Jeff, but also, she was always going to end up with someone who matched her level. Brandon's going somewhere. Everyone knows it. Someone who matched her level. Brandon's going somewhere. Everyone knows it. The implication was not subtle. The implication was that I did not match her level. That Brandon Hawk, the wide receiver, was going somewhere. That Jeff Runningwater, the business student with the lawn care company, was not. My father was beside me. He had also heard it. He was a man of enormous dignity and very few unnecessary words, and he said nothing. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder and looked at me, and the look said, "I know what you heard. I know what it means. Don't let it define anything." I excused myself and found a quiet corner of the reception hall. I stood there and I let myself feel the specific, compound humiliation of that moment. The breakup layered under the public dismissal layered under the comparison I had involuntarily lost. The assumption, stated so casually that it wasn't even framed as an opinion but as a fact, that I was the kind of person whose best was already visible and who would remain at whatever level he was currently at, while other people, better resourced, more visible, more apparently promising, moved onward and upward. I was 22 years old. I had a business degree, a lawn care company, and a notebook full of plans. The notebook full of plans was not impressive to anyone in that reception hall. I went back to my parents and I smiled for the photographs and I ate the food and I talked to people and I was fine. Completely fine. Entirely present. But something had crystallized in me in that corner of the reception hall that I can only describe as the decision to be undeniable. Not to prove anyone wrong in the reactive, wound-driven way of someone who can't let something go, but to build something so real and so lasting and so objectively significant that the question of who was going somewhere would eventually answer itself without my input. That was the day I really started. The summer after graduation, I launched running water services and consulting. This is not the story of a man who got lucky. I want to be clear about that before I tell you how things developed, because the version of the story that leaves out the specific, granular, relentless effort of the first several years is a dishonest version. What happened to my company happened because of work. The specific kind of work that looks invisible from the outside because it's happening at 6 in the morning and 11 at night and in the hours that other people spend doing things that are more comfortable. The company started as exactly what I knew: property maintenance and services. Lawn care expanded into full grounds management, snow removal, facility maintenance contracts. I started local, with the relationships I'd built during the college years, and I built the service quality with the same obsessiveness I'd brought to everything since the first lawn mowing operation at 14. The first year was breaking even. Genuinely breaking even. I paid my employees fairly, I kept the quality high, I reinvested almost everything back into equipment and capacity, and I paid myself the minimum I needed to live on. I lived the minimum I needed to live on without drama. I was used to it. The second year was the year I started winning facility management contracts. Not residential, commercial, business parks, small retail centers, government buildings. I had spent the first year building a reputation for reliability and quality that was specific and demonstrable, and when those larger contracts came up for bid, I had the track record to compete for them. I won 4 in the second year. 4 was enough to change the math fundamentally. I moved back to Montana after the second year and established the business headquarters in Billings, close enough to several growing commercial corridors to serve a real market. I hired a full-time operations manager, a woman named Evelyn Three Bears, who had a facility management background and an organizational intelligence that immediately made the company better, and I started to build the team rather than just the contracts. Year 3 was the year we added construction services. Not full construction, maintenance contracting, renovations, improvements to the facilities we were already managing. It was a natural extension. It was also the year we won our first government contract, which was a different order of magnitude in terms of both volume and credibility. I called my father every Sunday. Not because I was looking for approval, I had made peace with not needing that from external sources, but because he was a carpenter who had spent 30 years building things with quality and patience, and when I described the business challenges I was navigating, he understood them in a structural way that most people didn't. He asked the right questions. He said make sure the foundation is right before you add a floor. He said it about buildings. He meant everything. Calvin, my older brother, joined the company in year 4. He brought the electrical contracting capacity that expanded our service range significantly, and that was also, frankly, the most valuable addition I made in that period. Calvin's competence and reliability and total absence of ego made him the best business partner I never planned to have. Marcus cheered us on from a distance and said he'd join when we went public, which was a joke that everyone was increasingly less certain was a joke. I did not think about Cassandra Littlefeather very much in those years. I had done the grieving, properly, in the months after graduation, without rushing it or performing it, and I had put it down. I thought about the things she'd said that were worth carrying, and I tried to carry them fairly. The feedback about focus and presence that was real criticism, the recognition that building something can create distance from the people you're building it with. Those were things I tried to take seriously. The rest, the comparison, Sierra's voice at the reception, the assumption that I was going nowhere, I did not carry. Not because I was disciplined enough to let it go in the easy sense, but because I had genuinely found something more useful to do with the energy. I was building. And building required everything. I want to be honest about something that is slightly uncomfortable to admit. I was not completely without knowledge of what was happening in Cassandra and Brandon Hawk's life during those years. The world is connected, and Montana is not that large, and communities share information with the thoroughness of places that have known each other a long time. Brandon had, as predicted, gone somewhere. He'd been drafted in the 4th round by the Copper Ridge Stallions, a professional indoor football team that played in a league that was not the NFL but was professional and paid real money and carried real visibility. He was good. 4th round wasn't a gift, he'd earned it, and he developed quickly in his first years in the league. By his 3rd season he was a starter. By his 4th he was one of the team's best performers. They had married 2 years after graduation, in a ceremony that was apparently significant enough to be covered by a regional sports publication. I had seen one photograph, shared by a mutual connection on social media, in the way these things appear whether you're looking for them or not. They looked exactly as you would expect them to look. Beautiful, poised, the kind of couple that photographs well, which is its own kind of information about what they'd chosen to build. There was a child, a son, within 3 years of the wedding. I knew this because the Crow Nation community is connected in real ways, and the information was not secret. I held all of this at exactly the arm's length that my own peace required. Which is to say, I knew it, I filed it, I moved on. What I heard that I did not expect was what filtered back through the same network 2 years later. That the marriage was under significant pressure. Not my business, and I made it not my business. But the information arrived in the way information arrives in connected communities. Unsolicited, through people who meant it kindly, and impossible to fully unknow. The specific nature of the pressure, that Brandon Hawk, successful and visible and the thing he'd been predicted to be, had developed around that success a quality of self-involvement that expressed itself in ways that were hard to live with. The specific ways are not mine to detail. But the general shape was one I recognized, not because I had experienced it myself, but because the territory of someone who confuses being exceptional at a specific thing with being exceptional generally is well-mapped terrain. I heard this and I sat with it for a moment and then I put it down, because the temptation to feel satisfied by it was not a temptation I wanted to entertain. Satisfaction at someone else's difficulty is a kind of smallness I had no interest in. I had chosen my own road and I was walking it, and what happened on their road was their road. But I heard it. And it sat in me somewhere. Not triumphantly. Just as information. Year 5 was when the company changed shape in a way I hadn't fully planned for, but that, looking back, was the natural consequence of everything I'd been building. I had been in facility management and construction services for 5 years. The company had grown steadily and was now a regional operation with 62 employees and a contract portfolio that covered commercial, government, and institutional clients. The work was good and I was proud of it, and it was generating real revenue, and I had real savings for the first time in my life. But I had been watching, in the years of building the services company, how real estate worked. Not just the physical properties, the economics of it. How property value was created. How the difference between an asset managed well and an asset managed poorly could be enormous. How the people who owned the properties I managed were, in many cases, making more money from ownership than I was from service. My father's voice in my head. You see how things work, Jeff. That's a gift. I started buying property. Not dramatically. Not with borrowed capital I couldn't service. Carefully, in the way I did everything. The first purchase was a small commercial strip that needed renovation and better management, in a neighborhood that I understood from our service work was transitioning in a way that meant values were going to move. I bought it, renovated it with our own contracting capacity, which meant I understood the true cost of the work, and managed it myself. It worked. I bought another. And another. And then, In the third year of real estate activity, I made the first genuinely large acquisition, a mid-sized mixed-use building in Billings that required real capital and real courage and a relationship with a financial institution that I had been carefully cultivating for 2 years in preparation. I hired a real estate director, a man named Theodore Graymountain who had 20 years of commercial real estate experience and who immediately told me 3 things I was doing wrong, which was exactly what I needed. We built a real estate division. It grew faster than the services business had because the compounding of ownership is different from the compounding of service. Ownership builds equity that the service business had built for me, but only for myself. By year 7, the company had transformed. Running Water Services had become Running Water Group, a diversified holding company with 3 operating divisions: facility management, construction services, and real estate. We had 140 employees. We were working with a private equity firm on a growth strategy. I had a net worth that would have been incomprehensible to the version of me sitting in the corner of that graduation reception. And I was 31 years old. I am not telling you this to boast. I am telling you because the next part of the story doesn't work without understanding what I had actually built, and what I had built was real. It was not a lucky investment or a fortunate inheritance or the result of starting from a place of advantage. It was made of the specific, granular, grinding work of a decade, and it was mine in the way that only things you have made with the full cost of your time and energy and attention are truly yours. I need to stop here for a second. Because if you've been watching this story from the beginning, you've watched Jeff Running Water go from a lawn mower on a reservation to the CEO of a multi-division holding company. And we haven't even gotten to the part the title promised yet. And I want to say something about that journey before we get there. About the years in between the betrayal and the arrival. About the decade of work that nobody saw except the people doing it with him. The world loves the highlight reel. The moment in the conference room with the pen. The signing. The photo. But the story is always in what happened before the room. If you're in the before the room part of your story right now, the grinding, invisible, nobody is watching part, this channel is for you. Every single week, we tell stories from inside the hard middle, and we don't skip to the end until we've done right by the middle. Subscribe right now if you haven't. And share this video with the person in your life who is in their before the room chapter right now. They need to see that the room is real, that it exists, that the work gets you there. Subscribe. Share. Let's get back to Jeff. Because we're almost at the conference room. And I promise you, it is worth every second of the journey. The Copper Ridge Stallions entered my life as a business proposition before they entered it as a personal one. The team was owned by a family named Whitmore. Old Montana money, third-generation ownership, the kind of ownership that had been handed down rather than earned in the current generation's hands. The Whitmore family's third generation had other interests and other problems and had been managing the team with declining attention for about 5 years, which meant the team's off-field operations were significantly underdeveloped relative to its on-field talent. I had been looking at sports assets as part of a broader portfolio diversification strategy that Theodore Graymountain and I had developed with our private equity partners. Sports assets, specifically in the indoor professional leagues, were genuinely undervalued in a way that the financial model supported clearly. The combination of brand equity, real estate value from the venue relationships, media rights, and merchandise was being left on the table by ownership groups that didn't apply modern sports business practices. The Stallions were a textbook example. Good team, underperforming business. The Whitmore family had been quietly signaling their interest in an exit for 18 months. We had been following the situation for 12. My CFO, a woman named Angela Sweetgrass who was the most rigorous financial mind I had ever worked with and who had joined us from a private equity firm 2 years earlier, had built the model. The acquisition made sense at any number below $160 million. At 140, it was excellent. I knew Brandon Hawk played for the team. I had known it for years. When we first identified the Stallions as a potential acquisition target, 18 months before the deal closed, the name Brandon Hawk was on the roster and I had registered it and set it aside as personally irrelevant, because it was. Angela, who knew about Cassandra the way that people who work closely with you eventually know the significant chapters of your life, raised an eyebrow at our first internal meeting about the deal. "You're aware," she said. "I'm aware," I said. "And you're comfortable." "Angela, I'm buying a business. Not settling a score." She looked at me for a moment. Good, she said. And moved on to the financial model. That was the entirety of the personal dimension of the decision. Everything else was business. The acquisition process was a full year. Due diligence, negotiation, regulatory review, the specific machinery of a transaction that involves real property, league approvals, and the particular complexity of a sports team with contractual obligations to players and staff. Angela led the financial side with Theodore on the real estate component, and a legal team I had assembled over 3 years of significant transactions. We got it done. The signing was on a Tuesday in March. The conference room in the Whitmore family's downtown Billings office was oak and leather, and the particular aesthetics of money that has been established long enough not to need to announce itself anymore. 12 people around the table. 3 cameras. The sports network had gotten the exclusive through a relationship with the outgoing ownership group, and their presence was part of the Whitmore family's exit strategy, because being filmed selling a major regional sports asset for $140 million is not an unwelcome kind of visibility. I was in the charcoal suit. Angela was beside me. Theodore across. Our legal counsel at the end of the table. The Whitmore family's representatives on the other side. The document was 47 pages. I had read every page multiple times. This is a thing I do. I read everything myself, always, because the thing you don't read is always the thing that matters. I signed. The room reacted. Handshakes. Camera clicks. The sports network correspondent said something to his camera about a historic transfer of ownership. And on the monitor at the front of the room, the sports network's preview clip was running. Highlights of the Stallions' most recent season, the team I had just acquired. Brandon Hawk, number 7, making a catch in the end zone. The crowd going wild. His name on the back of the jersey. And then his face in the camera after the catch. That specific, familiar quality of confident visibility that had always been his particular signature. I looked at the screen for 2 seconds. And then I smiled. The real smile. The one from deep. Angela, beside me, said very quietly, meant only for me, "How does it feel?" "Like work," I said. "Good work." She nodded. "It is good work," she said. And that was the whole personal dimension of the moment. Everything else was the business of what came next. The news broke publicly 48 hours after the signing. The sports network had the exclusive, so when it went live, it went big. Local sports coverage, business press, the regional outlets that covered both. I was used to coverage by this point. 3 years of significant transactions had made me recognizable in Montana business circles in a way that I'd had to learn to navigate. But the sports team acquisition was different. Sports coverage reaches people that business coverage doesn't, and the story had elements that made it shareable. Young CEO, regional company, Native American founder, major sports asset, $140 million deal. It traveled. I was in a meeting with our new team general manager, a woman I'd hired away from a professional sports consultancy named Diana Redcloud, who was outstanding and who was already building the operational overhaul we'd planned, when my assistant knocked and said I had a call I might want to take. I stepped out. The number was familiar in the way that numbers you haven't called in 9 years can still be familiar. The area code. The specific sequence. I answered. "Jeff." Her voice was the same and completely different simultaneously. Time does that to a voice. The fundamental note is unchanged, but something around it has shifted. "Cassandra," I said. A pause. "You probably knew this call was going to come at some point." "I didn't plan for it either way," I said honestly. Another pause. Shorter. "I saw the news. I assumed. The Stallions." She said it flatly, not a question. "Yes." The silence that followed was several seconds long and carried the specific weight of 9 years of separate lives arriving in the same moment. "How are you?" she said. And I think she meant it genuinely, which almost made it harder. "Good," I said. "Really good. You." A pause that told me the answer before the words did. "It's been, Jeff. Things have been difficult." Her voice had something in it I hadn't heard when we were together, which was the sound of someone who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that the weight shows even when they're trying to stand straight. "Brandon and we've been having a hard time." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "And I mean that." "He doesn't know I'm calling," she said. Okay. I wanted you to know that I've thought about what happened. About how I handled things. I've thought about it a lot. I was quiet for a moment. Cassandra. I appreciate that. I genuinely do. 9 years is a long time to carry something, and I hope you're able to put it down. Are you? She asked. I put it down a long time ago, I said. I heard her breath change slightly on the other end. Not quite a sound. Just a shift. You built something incredible, she said. Yes, I said. I did. I always knew you would, she said. And I think she believed that. I think memory had been kind to her self-image in the way that memory often is. The Sierra voice in the graduation reception had a different version of events, but Cassandra's memory had probably softened that corner. Be well, I said. Take care of your son. Jeff. I mean it sincerely, I said. Be well. I ended the call. I stood in the corridor outside the meeting room for a moment. Not with triumph. Not with grief. With something cleaner than either. A kind of clarity that comes when the chapter you closed is definitively, finally, completely closed. Not by you. By time. By the accumulation of everything that happens in 9 years of separate living. I went back into the meeting room. Sorry about that, I said to Diana Redcloud. You were saying about the operations review? She looked at me for a moment. The way people look at you when they sense something has happened but are professional enough not to ask, and then she picked up exactly where we'd left off. I met Brandon Hawk in person for the first time as his employer 6 weeks after the acquisition. I had scheduled a series of one-on-one meetings with the key players. Not the whole roster, the key ones, the people whose buy-in and understanding of the new direction would matter most for the transition. The team's relationship with ownership had been distant and functional under the Whitmore family, which meant there was real work to do in establishing what the new ownership meant for the team's direction and for the people in it. Diana had set the schedule. Brandon Hawk was on it. He walked into my office, the renovated owner's suite that we'd already begun updating, and I watched him register the space and then register me, and I watched the specific moment when what he knew about me from the public coverage met whatever he'd assumed I would be like in person. He was, up close, exactly what he looked like from a distance. Built the way professional athletes are built, with the ease of movement that elite physical training produces. Good-looking in the unfussy way of someone who doesn't need to work at it. He extended his hand. Mr. Running Water, he said. Jeff, I said. Please. We sat. I had his player file in front of me. Performance metrics, contract terms, the detailed analytics package our new sports operations team had been building. I knew his numbers the way I knew the numbers of any significant asset. Specifically, completely, with full context. I want to be straightforward with you about what this ownership transition means, I said. The team's on-field performance has been strong. You specifically have been one of the most important contributors to that performance over the last 4 seasons. None of that is changing. What's changing is the infrastructure around it. He was listening with the focused attention of someone calculating what the new information means for their personal position. Athlete negotiations are a specific kind of conversation, and I'd been briefed on how to run them. The contract situation, he said. Your current contract has 2 years remaining, I said. We're not looking to renegotiate downward. If anything, we're looking at what extension looks like, because we're building something here and we want the people who have built the team to be part of the next chapter. He looked at me, reassessing something. I heard things about you, he said after a moment. Before the deal closed. People in Montana talk. They do, I said. You're from the reservation, he said. Blackfoot. Yes. He nodded. He was Cheyenne. He understood the geography of that, what it meant to come from a specific place and carry it into a different kind of room. I didn't know that from the news coverage, he said. I don't lead with it professionally, I said. But I don't hide it either. He was quiet for a moment. You and Cassandra, he said. And then stopped. I looked at him. I knew, he said. Before we got together. I knew about you. She talked about you. He paused. Not a lot. But enough that I knew you had been something real. This was not the conversation I had planned for this meeting. This was not the conversation I had planned for any meeting with this man. I sat with it for a moment. She deserved better honesty from both of us, I said. At the time. He looked at the table. Something moved in his face that was not comfortable to watch. Not because it was ugly, but because it was true. Yeah, he said. You're probably right about that. We sat with the moment for a beat. How is she? I asked. Not strategically. Genuinely. It's complicated, he said. I know, I said. We looked at each other. Two men who had occupied the same woman's story at different times, who had been compared to each other without either of them asking for the comparison, who were now sitting on opposite sides of a desk that I owned. I want to do well here, he said, and he meant the team. Under the new ownership. I want to be part of what you're building. Good, I said. So do we. We shook hands again at the end of the meeting. It was not a warm handshake, and it was not a cold one. It was the handshake of two people who have decided to be professionals about something that could easily be personal, and who both understand that the professionalism is the right choice. He left. I sat in my chair for a moment. Diana knocked and came in. How did it go? Fine, I said. He's on board. She looked at me with a look she had for moments she suspected contained more than the surface. Good, she said, and didn't push. That was the right call. The first full season under Running Water Group ownership was a season of genuine transformation. I want to tell you something about owning a sports team that is different from what I expected. The emotions of it are completely different from the emotions of any other business I have owned. When a facility management contract underperforms, I am concerned and I problem solve. When my football team loses on a Saturday night, something happens in my chest that is disproportionate to the financial stakes and entirely understandable to anyone who has ever been a fan of anything. I had not known I was a fan until I owned the team. And then I discovered that I was something more than a fan. I was invested in the specific human performances of the people I employed in a way that the distance of ownership cannot fully protect you from. I sat in the owner's box for the first home game of the season, and I watched 62 employees do their jobs on the field, and a stadium full of fans do their part in the stands, and something in me, something not related to the financial model or the strategic plan or the acquisition terms, just felt glad. Glad in the simple, direct, unstrategized way of someone doing something they didn't know they were built for until they were doing it. We went 8-4 in the regular season. Good enough for playoffs. In the playoffs, we won the first round in a game that was decided in the final 2 minutes, and that cost me approximately 4 years of blood pressure in a single evening. Brandon Hawk had a strong season. He was exactly what the analytics had predicted and what the eye test confirmed. A professional operating at the level his contract reflected, doing his job well, contributing to wins. I watched him the way I watched all the players, with the interest of an owner who needs the team to succeed and the residual, occasional awareness that this specific person occupied a specific place in my personal history. That awareness was quieter than I'd expected. Not absent, but manageable, the way old injuries become manageable. Present in certain weather, irrelevant in good conditions. The team's operations, off the field, transformed more dramatically than the on-field performance. Diana Redcloud was exceptional. She rebuilt the commercial infrastructure, renegotiated the venue agreement, launched a community outreach program that put the team in schools and reservation communities across the region in a way that had never been done before under the Whitmore ownership. That last piece was personal. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. The team playing in communities like the one I'd grown up in, being visible in places where professional sports were usually something you watched from a distance, that mattered to me in a way that exceeded the business rationale, though the business rationale was also real. I went to 2 of those community visits myself. The first time I walked into a school gymnasium on a reservation in eastern Montana, and a kid of about 12 saw Brandon Hawk and lost his mind with excitement. The specific, complete, unself-conscious excitement that children bring to the things they love. Something happened in me that was worth the entire acquisition. Brandon signed the kid's jersey. He was good with kids, I noticed. Genuine, not performed. He crouched down and talked to the boy at his eye level, and the boy asked about the team, and Brandon answered seriously, like the questions mattered. Which they did. They always do. I stood at the edge of the gymnasium and watched this and thought, people are complicated, and the complication is the whole point. 6 months into the first season, Cassandra came to a home game. Not as a surprise. She came as a player's family member, which she was, which meant she had access to the family section and the post-game family gathering area the same as any other player's spouse or partner. I knew she was there because Diana had mentioned it in the day's logistics briefing. Brandon Hawk's wife will be at the game, Diana said, in the tone of someone mentioning a logistical detail while watching for something that is not a logistical reaction. Okay, I said. You'll likely cross paths at the post-game. That's fine, I said. Diana looked at me for exactly 1 second longer than the logistical detail required. I appreciate your management of this situation, she said, with the careful precision of a woman who means several things with one sentence. It's not a situation, I said. It's just people. I saw her in the family area after the game. We won. A good, clean win, the kind that's satisfying without being dramatic, and the mood in the family area was warm and relaxed. She looked different. Not worse, not better. Different in the way that 9 years makes you different. She'd changed her hair. She was wearing a stallion's jacket, and she looked like she'd dressed carefully for the occasion in the way of someone who wants to feel composed. We made eye contact across the room. She came over. Because she is Cassandra, and Cassandra never lets uncomfortable things remain unaddressed. Some things about people do not change. Jeff, she said. Cassandra. I smiled. Genuinely. How are you? She looked at me for a moment. At the room, which was my room, the post-game space of my team, the context that 9 years had produced, and something passed across her face that I could not fully read and did not try to. I'm okay, she said. Really okay. Things have been. Brandon and I are working on it. Good, I said. I mean that. She nodded. Looked around the room again. You built something incredible, Jeff. You said that on the phone, I said. I believed it then and I believe it now. She smiled. Something in the smile was tired and real and not performing anything. I told Brandon once, when we were first together. I said, the guy I dated before you is going to build something that makes the world sit up. I said it and then I don't know. I stopped believing it. And you just kept going anyway. I did, I said. I should have stayed, she said. Not flirtatiously. Not as an invitation. As a reckoning. The honest statement of someone doing the ledger of their choices and arriving at an accurate total. I don't know about that, I said, because I genuinely didn't know. The counterfactual was unknowable and I'd made peace with not knowing. What I know is that the path I walked got me here. I'm at peace with the path. She looked at me. You're genuinely at peace with it, she said, slightly surprised. You're not saying it. No, I said. I'm not saying it. She nodded slowly. I'm glad, she said. And then, I'm going to find Brandon. Tell him he played well, I said. He did. She smiled one more time. The tired, real smile. Then she went to find her husband. I watched her go and I felt nothing dramatic, nothing triumphant. Just the specific, clean feeling of a person who has made their peace with a chapter so thoroughly that when the chapter reappears, it's just history. Interesting history. But history. My assistant appeared at my elbow. You have the ownership group dinner in 40 minutes. Right, I said. Let's go. In the second full season under Running Water Group ownership, the Stallions won the league championship. I want to tell you about the last game of that championship run because it is one of the most vivid things I have experienced as an adult and I think you deserve to hear it clearly. We were in the championship game on the road. The venue was the opposing team's home, which meant the crowd was against us for the full 60 minutes, which meant we had to produce something excellent without the home crowd's energy behind us. That is a specific test of a team, and it is one of the truest tests because it strips away the atmosphere that flatters you and shows you only what you actually have. We had something. We had a team that Diana Redcloud had built into a genuine operational unit in 2 seasons. Players who trusted each other and the coaching staff, a support infrastructure that was the best in the league by the end of year 2, and a culture that the players themselves described as different from any team environment they'd been in before. I watched from the owner's box. Diana beside me, Angela on my right, Theodore on the phone managing a real estate matter simultaneously because he was Theodore and never fully off. And the game was everything championship games are. Tight, swinging, violent in the specific controlled violence way of physical sport, producing moments of exceptional beauty and moments of heart-stopping near failure with equal generosity. Brandon Hawk scored the go-ahead touchdown in the fourth quarter. A catch at the back of the end zone that required him to adjust mid-route, mid-air, in a way that I will never be physically capable of understanding, but that was objectively extraordinary. He held the ball as his feet hit the back line, right on the edge, perfectly controlled. The small section of Stallions fans in the away section erupted. Diana grabbed my arm without appearing to notice she'd done it. We held the lead. Final whistle. Champions. I was on the field. Because of course I was on the field. You cannot stay in a box when something like that happens. I was on the field with Diana and the coaching staff, and the players were everywhere, celebrating with the complete physical abandon of people who have just done the thing they've been building toward for a season. Brandon Hawk found me in the chaos. He was still in his helmet, his jersey darkened with the physical evidence of the game he'd just played. His face the face of someone who has just been part of something that will outlast the moment. He extended his hand. I took it. Thank you, he said. And he meant it for the environment that had let him do what he'd just done. For the ownership that had built the infrastructure around the talent. For the chance. You earned this, I said. The team earned this. He held my hand for a second longer than a handshake's length. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? He almost smiled. I don't know. Something smaller. I laughed. On a football field, in the chaos of a championship celebration, I laughed. I understand, I said. And I did. Because the assumption of smallness, for the kid from the broken pitch, for the boy from the reservation, for the man in the corner of the graduation reception, the assumption of smallness is always the starting point when the world has limited information and limited imagination. And the correction of that assumption is always the same thing: time and work and the refusing to stop. Congratulations, I said. He nodded. Went back to his teammates. Diana found me. How does it feel? She asked. Like work, I said. The very best work. She laughed. That's exactly what you said when we signed the deal. Because it was true then and it's true now, I said. I am 34 years old as I tell you this story. I own the Stallions. I own a real estate portfolio that would take an hour to describe accurately. I run a company that employs nearly 300 people across 3 divisions. I have built, from a lawn mower on a reservation in Montana, something that was not supposed to be possible for someone who started where I started, which is the most satisfying sentence I know how to write. I want to tell you the things I know now that I didn't know at 22, sitting in the corner of a graduation reception, hearing Sierra's voice tell the world that I wasn't going anywhere. The first thing is this: the people who define you by your origin are always working from insufficient information. When Uncle George told Henry not to embarrass the family, when Felix called Bella village, when Sierra said Jeff wasn't going anywhere, they were all doing the same thing. Using the available evidence to make a prediction without accounting for the variable that matters most, which is what a person decides to do with what they've been given. The available evidence at 22 was a lawn care company and a business degree and a notebook full of plans. The evidence was incomplete because I wasn't done. I have never been done. I will not be done for a long time. Nobody who counts you out at 22 knows who you're going to be at 34. Nobody who sees the beginning of the story knows the whole story. They make the judgment with the chapter they have, and then life writes the rest, and the rest is up to you. The second thing is, betrayal is information, not a verdict. What Cassandra did hurt me. The way she did it hurt more than the doing of it. But what she said in the kitchen, about presence, about focus, about the feeling of being accounted for rather than seen, that was real information. Hard information, delivered in the worst possible packaging, but real. I took it. I kept the useful part. I have tried to be more present in the years since. Not because she required it of me, but because she was not wrong, and taking in accurate information, even from painful sources, is not weakness. I also let her go. Fully, without residue, without the ongoing engagement that grief sometimes masquerades as. I let her go because carrying her was weight I didn't need, and I've always needed to travel light. The third thing is, building something is the best response to every version of doubt. Uncle George's caution. Felix's village. Sierra's voice. Cassandra's "That's not what I want." The 4-round draft question about whether Brandon was going somewhere and the implicit answer about whether I was. I built. I kept building. I did not build to prove them wrong. That's a subtle difference, but it's an important one. Building to prove people wrong is building for them. Building because the work is real and the vision is real and the thing you're making matters regardless of anyone's opinion is building for yourself. Build for yourself. Build because the thing is worth building. The evidence will accumulate. The proof will become undeniable. But none of that should be the reason. The reason should be the work itself. The fourth thing is, your origin is not your limitation. It is your foundation. I am Blackfoot. I am from a reservation in northwestern Montana. My father was a carpenter. My mother worked at the tribal health center. I shared a bedroom with 2 brothers. I mowed lawns at 14. None of that is background to overcome. None of that is deficit to compensate for. It is all foundation. Everything I understand about work, about quality, about community, about the value of things and the cost of things and the importance of keeping your word and building something that lasts. I learned that foundation on the reservation, in my father's workshop, in my mother's example, in the specific environment of a community that has survived things that were designed to eliminate it. I carry all of it forward, not away from. The fifth thing is, the moment you always imagined is smaller than you expected and larger than you expected simultaneously. The conference room. The pen. The monitor showing Brandon Hawk's face 2 seconds after I signed. I had imagined variations of that moment for 9 years. Not obsessively. Not in the way of someone who has built their life around a specific revenge fantasy. But it was there, occasionally, in the way that things we've survived sometimes are. The moment, when it came, was not triumphant in the way I might have imagined. It was just real. A room with people and documents and cameras and a business transaction being completed. My name on a contract. The pen was not actually heavy, but what followed it was everything. The work that came after. The season. The championship. The school gymnasium in eastern Montana with the 12-year-old in front of Brandon Hawk, losing his mind with excitement. That was the real moment. The room was just a door. My brother Calvin sits on the board of Running Water Group. My brother Marcus finally joined, as promised, and is managing a community development initiative we launched that is building mixed-income housing and commercial space on and adjacent to reservation land in 3 different tribal communities. My mother comes to home games when her schedule allows, and she sits in the owner's box and pretends she watches football, which she does not. But she watches the people the way she has always watched people with the quality of attention she brought to the counseling work. My father came to 1 game. 1 game, in 2 seasons. He sat in the box and he watched the field and he said almost nothing for 3 hours. Afterward, walking to the car, he said, "You built this on the same foundation as everything else." "What foundation?" I asked. "Quality," he said. "Consistency. People can feel the difference." I thought about the first lawn care clients. About the 11 houses, the schedule, the pricing structure. About keeping it at the same quality whether anyone was watching or not. "You taught me that," I said. He made the sound he makes when he's acknowledged something and doesn't need to say more. Then he got in the car. Some conversations are their own complete thing. Brandon Hawk re-signed in the off-season. 3-year extension, fair to both sides, built on the foundation of a year of professional relationship that was uncomplicated and productive. He plays well. He is part of what we're building and he knows it and he brings himself to it fully. His personal life is his personal life. I don't know the current state of it and I don't ask. What I know is that he is a professional who does his job with the seriousness his talent deserves, and that is what I need from him, and it's what I have. Cassandra I have not spoken to since the postgame in that first season. I think about her occasionally in the way you think about significant chapters of your life, not with longing or bitterness, but with a simple acknowledgement that it was real. She was part of the story. The specific, human, complicated part that stories always contain. I hope she is well. I mean that. And me. I am 34 years old and I run a football club and a real estate portfolio and a services company and a community development initiative, and I still wake up before 6 most mornings because there is work to do and I am, at my core, Still the kid who built the schedule and did the work and kept the quality consistent whether anyone was watching or not. I have not found, yet, the person I want to build the personal chapter with. That is honest. I have been, in the years of building the professional life, more focused on what I was building than on who I was building it with. I am working on the balance of that. My mother has opinions. Marcus has opinions delivered primarily in the form of extremely specific and completely unsolicited dating advice. Calvin has the wisdom to say nothing and the decency to look supportive. The story is not complete. I would not have it any other way. A complete story is a finished one, and I am not finished. The broken crossbar pitch, if I can borrow Henry's image, because it is exactly right, is always the foundation. What you learn about the game before the game knows you're playing is the thing that carries you through every room that comes after. The room with the pen was just a room. Everything I built to get there was the real thing. Before we close, I want to give you the lessons of Jeff's story. Not the easy ones. Lesson 1. The assumption of your limitation is always made with incomplete information. Sierra didn't know the notebook. She didn't know the plans or the discipline or the specific quality of focus that a person builds when they grow up having to earn everything. She made her prediction with the evidence she had. The evidence was insufficient. The verdict was wrong. It was always going to be wrong, because the story wasn't over. When someone counts you out, ask yourself, do they have complete information? They never do. The story isn't over. Keep writing it. Lesson 2. Betrayal teaches you something if you let it. Cassandra's honesty in that kitchen, painful, badly timed, embedded in her own self-justification, contained something real. The feedback about presence and being accounted for was accurate. Jeff took it. He didn't take it on the night. But he took it eventually, and he tried to build it into who he was. The worst deliveries sometimes carry the most useful information. The work is separating the truth in the message from the damage in the delivery. Lesson 3. Build for yourself. The proof is a byproduct. Jeff didn't build the company to buy the stallions to walk into a room with Brandon Hawk's face on a monitor. He built the company because the work was real and the vision was real and the thing was worth building. The pen in the conference room was a byproduct of everything that preceded it. Build because the thing is worth building. The world will eventually see it. But you have to be doing it for a reason that survives before the world sees it. Lesson 4. Your origin is your foundation, not your ceiling. The reservation, the bedroom shared with 2 brothers, the lawnmower at 14, these are not things that Jeff built in spite of. They are things he built because of. The foundation that comes from growing up in a community that has survived real adversity, from parents who built quality into everything they touched, from brothers who were real, that foundation held everything that came after. Know your foundation. Don't run from it. Build on it. Lesson 5. Peace is the real victory. The conference room was not the victory. The post-game with Cassandra was not the victory. The championship was beautiful and it mattered and it was earned. But the real victory was the afternoon on the bench by the practice fields after that Thursday in April, when Jeff made the decision not to perform devastation. The real victory was 9 years of building without the weight of what had happened making the work heavier. The real victory was walking into the post-game family area and looking at Cassandra and feeling peace. Just peace. Clean and complete. That is the outcome worth working toward. Not the conference room but peace, and the point? The point was the work. The Tuesday mornings. The evenings with the notebook. The year of rehab when it might not work. The 62 employees. Calvin with his electrical license. Angela with the financial model. Diana building the culture that won the championship. The point was the decision, made alone at 22 in the corner of a graduation reception, to be undeniable. And here's what I want to say to you now. You are carrying something that the people around you have underestimated. I don't know what it is. I don't know your specific version of the notebook, or the broken crossbar, or the lawnmower at 14. But I know you have it, because you're watching this. Because this story reached you. Because something in it found the part of you that knows the work is real even when nobody else is counting it yet. Just be undeniable. Not for them. For yourself. Because the thing you're building is worth building, and because the pen in whatever conference room is waiting for you at the end of the story is real, and because the gap between here and there is filled with work that only you can do. Here's what I need from you right now. 1. Subscribe. Right now. This channel exists to tell these stories every single week, and you deserve to be here for every one of them. Hit the button. 2. Like this video. It helps us reach the next person who needs this story. That person is real. They're out there right now in their corner of a graduation reception, or their parking lot, or their rehab, or their first terrible year of building something nobody believes in yet. Help us find them. 3. Comment. Tell me, what did someone assume about you that turned out to be completely wrong? Or tell me what you're building right now that the world hasn't caught up to yet. I read every comment. Every single one. This is a real community. 4. Share this. Send it to the person who needs to hear that where you start is not where you're going. That the notebook is real. That the work adds up. That the room with the pen is waiting. And come back next week. Because we have another story. Another person. Another version of the most important truth I know how to tell. The people who count you out are always working from incomplete information. Give them the rest of the story. We'll see you in the next one.